Good morning, everybody. Well, it's good afternoon now, so I'm here today to talk about the Open Upgrade project at a fairly high level as well. So when we're talking about the OCA days and talking about having a talk on Open Upgrade, it ended up landing on me, and I am not one of the core maintainers of Open Upgrade. So I'm involved on the board, I'm the vice president of the board, and my involvement within Open Upgrade is very much one of helping to manage the project, doing reviews, not doing too much of the heavy lifting there. So what I want to cover off today is just to really try and demystify things. So just talk about, oh sorry, I've got a New Zealand accent, so if you can't understand or need me to slow down, just ask me to. To talk about what is Open Upgrade, why people find it so difficult, why as a developer, in particular, as a functional person, you should contribute to the project. Talk through some of the objections that we receive about what's stopping people from contributing. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Some good questions might be around what's going on in the project at the moment. So, Open Upgrade, it's the largest, most supported open source upgrade path for Odoo, right? It's made up of 4 components, and it's really important to get your head around these components if you're not familiar with the project. Just before I go into this, just to show of hands, how many people have used Open Upgrade to upgrade a customer's database? All right, so a few of you. How many of you ever contributed a migration script to the Open Upgrade project? Much fewer, right? How many of you used Open Upgrade to do, well, the Open Upgrade library to do migrations for your custom code? Yeah, so a few more. Okay. So at the top there, we've got the Open Upgrade library, right? So that's a bunch of functions that make a lot of the upgrade process easier, renaming fields, renaming XML IDs, moving columns, just a lot of the common things that you need to do when you're migrating one data model to a new data model. The second part is the upgrade analysis. So that there is a tool that we run that gives us the differences between old version of Odoo, new version of Odoo. Then we have the Open Upgrade framework, and that is now, thanks to some fantastic work by the Open Upgrade team, it's it's effectively some patches that run on top of Odoo in order to enable the upgrade to work, right? Disables, what does it disable, Stefan? Things like view checking and just overrides that we need to make it work. And then finally, within the Open Upgrade repository, we've got the Open Upgrade scripts module. So this holds all of the scripts for migrating the standard Odoo community modules. And that there's pretty much the part that people know, right? The scripts that are there, and a big chunk of what I want to talk about today. So why is Open Upgrade important? It gives you some agency and it gives you some control, right? You're not sending your database off into Odoo under an enterprise edition. If you're only running community, then of course it's one of your few choices anyway. It gives you freedom around if you need to tweak certain parts of the upgrade process, if you need to do it on different timings, if you can't send data, all sorts of privacy issues there. It's also good for Odoo to have a little bit of competition in this space, if I'm being honest. Keeps them honest, and also co-opetition. And certainly over the years within the Open Upgrade team, we've talked to Odoo's own upgrade teams around things to do there. So in terms of the ecosystem, Open Upgrade's a really, really important project. Why is it so hard? Because migration's hard, right? It's not that Open Upgrade as a tool itself is particularly difficult, it's that the process of migration is difficult, and we'll get into some of those reasons on the next slide. In terms of becoming involved in the project, this is for me the order of difficulty in becoming involved, right? And where you should ask yourself, where am I on this list, right? So running Open Upgrade, if you're really lucky, you just press a button and it runs and it's all done, right? Has that ever happened to anybody here? Right. There's always some errors in customer data and things that we need to fix. The next thing is writing the migration scripts, because there's lots to reference against. I must admit, some of my recent migration scripts, I've had GitHub Copilot installed and they've almost been self-writing. That there's been quite an interesting experience, self-writing incorrectly. Then reviewing migration scripts. So reviewing migration scripts is quite a bit, to me, more difficult than actually writing the migration scripts, because you need to have really strong knowledge around Postgres, around potential performance issues, around whether, as we're talking this morning, whether fields have changed semantics between versions. So reviewing kind of comes after writing. And then at the end of it, the core framework and the modules like Open Upgrade Lib, contributing to the framework, those kinds of things I'd put at a different level. Really, the first step you want to get to is to be able to run it and then be able to write migration scripts, both for the core community modules and for your own code. We're only going to do one slide on how to do it with Open Upgrade, and it's actually a really simple process, and it's not that different to the enterprise process really, right? First of all, we back up the data, we ensure we've got some dependencies installed and we've got the right things in the path. We run one command down the bottom there, and if it's just for your own code, you've got back an enterprise upgrade or you've got back something like that, then you might not update all, you might just update specific modules. You run it, you see what you get, fix any data errors that happened along the way, check for any other errors within your data, and then repeat the cycle until it works. And everybody should, well, a lot of hands went up, so this looks like the migration process to everybody, in a nutshell, roughly. Yeah, a lot more tears than that often. Now, in terms of writing migration scripts and why you should contribute to Open Upgrade, and in terms of contributing migration scripts, there's, I'm an Infosys guy, by the way, I'm not a developer, so within information systems, we have this concept called absorptive capacity. Has anybody heard of this concept? So absorptive capacity is it's a theory of organizational learning by Cohen and Leventhal, I think. But basically what it is it's about the more an organization learns, the more capacity it has to learn, right? And so, in other words, if you've got competitors outside of the OCA that aren't familiar with the OCA, and you're familiar with all the OCA modules, right, you have a competitive advantage because they've still got to learn that before they can learn the next step to learn the next step, right? So absorptive capacity is how much more knowledge can I absorb based on the knowledge that I've already acquired. And certainly by contributing migration scripts, you learn a lot about Odoo and you learn a lot about what happens. So in terms of personal growth, a deeper understanding of when we go from version to version, obviously there's some things that change. And so by writing migration scripts for these things is that you, as a developer, you have to expose yourself to new things. So you have to start more deeply understanding functional side of things. So why have they changed this field? What does this mean? What might this mean for my custom code, right? And that sort of leads into the next point, that it enables you to migrate your custom and dependent modules much faster because you already understand the changes within the earlier modules. The other thing that it does as well is that when you write these migration scripts, you soon learn how to defensively, I suppose is the right word, write your own custom code, right? You know that if you change something in a particular way, as opposed to doing it in another way, is that it's going to be harder for you to migrate. And so you make design decisions around that. And I think we've actually seen a little bit of that with Odoo themselves now that they have to write their migration scripts with their code, right? It's that the ability to write migration scripts has got easier because the developers are deliberately migrating their code to the next version in such a way that it is easier to write migration code for. The other reason is once you've been able to do this and do this for a while, these are very valued skills in the market. And finally, once you've got this understanding, I suppose, of the processes that you go through when you have to migrate a module, so that you become a lot more fearless in writing your own code, because you know that as you're writing it, you're going, okay, either I'm going to cause myself a real problem here, so I need to go back and try this again, right? Or I can make these changes because I know how to migrate them. And you can do some quite big things that don't require a lot of effort to migrate. And then once you've mastered that writing of migration scripts, then you kind of move into the next section, all right? But I'll just jump back a slide, because on that personal growth side, I think it's really, really important to talk about is that as developers, it's all very well to add fields and models and all of that, right? But once you get into writing migration scripts, you really start to be a more complete developer in terms of understanding the functional side of things, understanding the impacts of things, and just knowing how Odoo fits together, a much deeper knowledge, and being able to really understand the impact of changes on your code base in terms of what it means for the efforts of others and in terms of what it means for your customers. So what's stopping you? Lots of things, right? I don't have time to do it. So honestly, I don't find that too much of an excuse. I think that in terms of learning the API and doing it for some custom code, some simple things, renaming some fields, doing some columns, you can learn all that in a day or two if you want to. Knowledge. The project is documented. We're making more efforts to document it better. But equally, there's some very, very skilled people within the community. You might have to pay for their time, or your boss might need to pay for their time in order to bring that up. But certainly, if knowledge is a gap, there are places that you can go to find that knowledge and do that. My boss. So while I'm talking to you guys today, who I assume are primarily functional developers, individual contributors, is that you need to be able to demonstrate value in contributing to the project to your boss. Now, if you struggle with that, I'm happy to talk to them. It'll be a slightly different conversation. But it's a fairly easy thing, right? Because you become a much more complete developer, you're able to migrate your code faster, you're able to write better code as a result, and you get a much deeper understanding of Odoo to take to market. So other than that, is there anything else stopping people? Nothing then. So that's the end of the presentation, really. I mean, if people have got specific questions that they want to ask, there's some useful resources up there. So the first one up there is the Open Upgrade project itself. The second one is the library and the API, and we were having a little talk about the API yesterday. But that is completely documented up there in terms of all the functions that they have going back many versions. And then there's the documentation itself. And otherwise, any questions to the mailing list? Does anyone have any questions? Apart from Virginie.
So my question is, you explained that for functional people it's good to contribute. Really, I don't know how to. So do you have any idea?
So, I mean, certainly writing migration scripts is a technical process, and it's a process for developers. But on the functional side, and we were just talking about this yesterday as well, and one of the things that we are going to start doing with the Open Upgrade scripts is even just putting in doc strings within our migration functions so that you can understand the transformation that we're trying to make. But when you run Open Upgrade, I think it's critical for functional people to be involved, particularly if your developers aren't overly functionally strong, because you need to, at least in the running of it, validate that the data is correct, right? And a developer, a pure developer, none of the people in this room, of course, is that it's just going to see numbers and boxes at the end of the day, right? And so functional people, in terms of a migration process, are critical, right? Then if you take it a step back towards the writing of the migration scripts, and let's say there's a change in accounting, they get rid of analytic tags, right? That could happen. You need to be able to, as a functional person, understand, well, what is the impact of that? And then will that data migrate correctly? So it is a little bit harder for functional people because you need to have a little bit of code knowledge. But equally, I came from a functional background, and I almost think that the code knowledge is easier to gain than it is to gain the functional knowledge. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any more questions? Who wants to contribute to Open Upgrade? Who's going to contribute to Open Upgrade? So I'll just give you guys a little bit of background on where the project's at, seeing we've got a little bit of time. It's that right now we've got a real small group of core maintainers that are doing a hell of a lot of work, right? And of course they're getting benefit out of that. But we really want to start to be able to share some of that workload more and elevate them to making the tools even easier to use, some automations that we could do, work on the framework in order to really make this a strong, easy to use project where we can release really early after a new Odoo release. And that's getting easier as well. I think if we went back, even as short as version 13, right? And version 13 was a horrible version for migration, for us, for Odoo, right? Everyone knows what happened. Invoices went away. And it took Odoo a long time, right? 9-10 months to get really working migrations for enterprise customers. And it took us a long time as well. It took us nearly a year and a bit to get out the scripts. But since that experience, and since what I was talking about with Odoo before, is that 90%, maybe more, of the modules that need to be migrated, 2 or 3 hours worth of work at most. A lot of them are just nothing to do, right? Nothing's changed, all right, just put that one there through, right? And then we have a few modules where they've done some more complex changes that require a bit more effort. And of course, if you're looking to contribute, don't start on the ones that require more effort and are a bit more complex, right? You start with the ones that are fairly easy, renaming a few fields, maybe changing some XML details, those kinds of things. But migration, in terms of writing the scripts, is, honestly, it's probably 20% of the effort that it used to be. It's so much easier now. Daniel.
So just out of curiosity then, where within the Odoo module system is most of the effort? Is it in accounting? Is it in the marketing?
Largely that's at the whim of Fabian and his product management teams between versions. So when they make big changes, then naturally there's things. So within version 13, the big effort was around accounting. When they got rid of invoices and then all of a sudden you had to match things up, there were a bunch of other things. Did the bank statements change in version 13 or version 14, Stefan? Do you remember? When they converted the bank statement lines to account move lines, was that version 13 or version 14? Either way, so it depends what they've done. So in this version here, if I'm looking at the changes, and I haven't had a big look at the changes, I'd say there's going to be a bit of effort around accounting because analytic tags have gone. Translations have changed, although by the looks of things, that's not going to be too difficult. When we run those open upgrade analysis, you get a whole script worth of files. You get a bunch of analysis files that tell you what's changed in the model. So views that have been deleted, modules that have been merged, columns that have been renamed, models that have been renamed, those kinds of things. So you get an idea by the length of those files, but it just depends on what they release, where the effort is and where they put the effort in. So Version 9 or 8 was all the effort was around stock. Version 13, all the effort was around accounting. I think 10 or 11, it might have been around manufacturing. It just depends where they've put the effort in and where they've made the big refactors and big changes.
So the final question is then, could there be a little workshop to help novices like myself who are kind of opening the bonnet on this?
Excellent question. How much would you pay for a workshop? Like, honestly, if I went to the core maintainers and said, I've got, I don't know, 12 people, right? 12 people, how long do you want? 4 hours? 6 hours?
I was thinking, could we have one today?
No, we're not going to get one done today. It's a very complex project. But no, I mean, in terms of tutorial and training and really doing a workshop like that, would anybody be interested in that? Show of hands. All right. So let's say I said that would cost you, let's just make up a number, 250 euros. Would you pay it? For a day? The problem is, so yeah, a big problem with this project is that the guys who currently have the knowledge are busy guys and they're expensive guys, right? And you've got two choices when it comes to anything, right? And as integrators, we all know this, right? You can spend time or you can spend money, right? But you've got to spend one or the other. So if you want to gain that knowledge then, and you want us to go to that effort of finding someone to do such a workshop, then we'll happily do it, but it would have to be a charged thing because we can't ask these guys time for free. But is that something the community is interested in? It's something we've never tried. I just made it up while I was standing here. But
well, my argument is if you want to get people to contribute, quite often it's just to remove the obstacles. And from my personal perspective, it's just getting in front of the computer. Right, so I go to, where do I go? I press this button. It's stupid things like that. But for me, I learn by doing. That's the point. So
to that point and to some of the updates that we're doing around our documentation, and it's a little bit early days, although I have seen the first pull request, and I think there's going to be an RFQ going out shortly for us to improve the documentation. But that's not a face-to-face workshop kind of thing. That's a step-by-step tutorial that we're looking at building through some of the more simple cases. So, you know, my model has here's my analysis file. Now what do I do with it? Step it through. Okay, so this column's been renamed, so you need to do this in your pre-migration script, and this needs to happen in the post-migration, those kinds of things. So that's coming, but in terms of a more detailed workshop around, as I said, you know, the project's not hard, migration's what's hard, right? And that there requires time and money. Question? Oh, Daniel's got a question.
Sorry. So version 16 is just around the corner, being officially released. It will need open upgrade scripts. So what's the roadmap and how people here who want to contribute what's the next step they can do? What should be the next thing to help in that effort?
All right. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to ask someone to put their hand up shortly if I'm telling lies. We've already done the analysis. We've already done the framework. You can start contributing today, if you wish. And I believe there's been an open upgrade table downstairs. What work has that been doing?
Well, the open upgrade table is occupied with people who are not working on open upgrade.
So's this room.
But we can kick them out if there are any people who are interested. And I can tell you everything about open upgrade. And otherwise, if you want to try your hands on a migration script, just go to the migration ticket for version 16. We already have it. Just put your name down for it.
Yep. And just to that, and while you're here today, and to your question and to Daniel's question, is that there are some key people here. In fact, just about all of the key people from the Open Upgrade project are here. If you want to talk to them, they're really open to be spoken to. So we've got, is Sylvain in here? Okay, so you might be somewhere, but I can't see him. So we've got Sylvain, Stefan, Pedro, Miguel. Oh, you guys are over there. And so just find these guys and talk to them and just talk about your concerns or your opportunities and things that you might want to do.
I have a question, because I feel like that's sort of at the core of Odoo versus OCA modules. Because as we sit here, we all use OCA modules, and there's a new Odoo version every year. And as Pedro pointed out, it's a good idea to keep updating to newer versions. So aren't we all responsible to work on making those modules upgradable to new versions?
I mean, certainly. I mean, if you're the kind of person that wants to sit around and wait for somebody else to do the work, you're probably in the wrong community, all right? But it's one of these things, right? It's cart and horse, because there's no point migrating your own custom code or even OCA modules to the next version for a customer that's on the previous version if you can't migrate them, right?
So does that mean I wait for OCA modules to have their migration scripts before I work on my custom migration scripts?
So
and I'm always one or two versions behind?
So you need to be able to migrate in the first place, right? So certainly if you're doing a brand new implementation and you're going to start on, well, it's a pretty big release, this one. I was going to say start on tomorrow, but probably by about January. Then, of course, you can just migrate modules and not have to worry about data migration. But if you've got customers on older versions, then you need to be able to, first of all, ensure that you can migrate the core of the product. Now, for some people, that might be on enterprise, so they just get back the enterprise migrated stuff and just do the migration scripts for their custom code, OCA modules, those kinds of things. But for the most part, is that there is no other way to do it, right? Is that we need the community modules ready to go really as soon as we can. All right, we'll take two more questions. I don't want you guys to miss out on the good sandwiches, eh?
I was wondering if you can test the migration with only one module, because so far I've done only with full database, and I'm not sure you can do maybe just one module, test how it works, because it's most of the time, from my point of view at least, the modules are somehow interdependent. And if you don't have, let's say you said accounting has been a nightmare on 13, but if you don't have this one, some other you cannot test also.
So yeah, so that's a really interesting question that I can't answer very well. So certainly if we go back to here, you can, of course, just test one module by just updating just that module, but it's going to have its own dependencies and things that need to run. So unless its dependency chain has also been migrated, then no, you can't really test it. But you could in any way, right? In that if the migrations, I'll try and take an example off the top of my head, right? There's no point trying to test your migration for sales stock if you haven't done sale, right? But you can just do, rather than doing all, you can just do particular modules. And when you're writing modules, if you get to your dependency chain is done, and I'm just looking around to make sure that people are nodding because I'm not the person for this, is that you get to the point and then you're testing your module that you've migrated, is that rather than start from the start again, you can just iterate over and over that same module instead of using all, just using the module that you're trying to migrate.
But then also, because you were talking about functional tests afterwards, but then from my point of view, if you migrate only one module, your database will not start on the new version. So how do you test afterwards? It's
The expert.
Would you allow me,
Yeah,
Graeme?
no, I trust you entirely, Pedro. You take it.
Well, I think it's easier than all of this because due to the modular system we have, we can easily split the task to do on each module. So for concentrating in one module, you have to see the static analysis made on that module about the data model changes. And with that, you are able to perform theoretically the task to migrate that data model changes only. The rest is is not important in that moment. So you can even migrate the module with more dependencies in Odoo core to develop the migration scripts, concentrating on that. But then you hold it until all the dependency change is already done this job. And when you have it, now there is more or less the integration test. You test the whole chain, and maybe there is some adjustments, but the hardware is already done due to this static analysis. So it's not as hard as you can imagine if you are not into this. So I think it's very good to have this modular system, and the pre-work that is done through the analysis files that is generated with the things that can show the things to done. Because if you have a new field or a field has been removed, this is the reflection of any functional change that provokes this adding or this remove. Okay. Now, better? Okay.
And since you ask about functional testing, it is totally possible to migrate progressively from the bottom of the dependency chain to the top and progressively deliver to testing what you have migrated. So you don't need to wait until the end of migrating all your modules to give it to functional testing. We have done migrations with 600 or 700 modules on the database, where we could deliver daily new migrated modules to the customer or to internal testing. So it's totally possible. Yeah, you need to disable like constraints or required fields or stuff like that to unblock the database, but then you can move step by step.
Yeah, one last thing to that as well is that quite often what I find myself doing on larger migrations with a lot of custom code is that you migrate none of the custom code, right? You just migrate the database, and then you can start to make intelligent decisions as a developer and as a functional person about what you might want to do for that based on the changes that you've seen. So it is quite an iterative and incremental process. You're not just going to sit down one day, write your migration scripts for everything, press the button, and you're done. Last question.
So when I did some migrations, the part where I spent the most time was setting up all the environments, especially if I migrate across several versions, and iterating over the errors, relaunching, restoring a database to retest. Is there any? Did you have any feedback, any demands about setting up the whole thing to simplify the running process?
So, I mean, deployment methodologies is how long is a piece of string, right? There's people that use standard bare metal, there's people that use VPSs, there's people that use Docker, Docker Compose, Swarm, all those kinds of things. The one thing that I would say is universal in all of that, because generally you have a lot of failures, is one of my favorite tricks to do is to install my database as a template into Postgres, and then constantly create database from template. So I'm not having to restore that database the entire time. If you want to have a talk about, well, a conversation about a more complex process, Danny up the back there has done an 8 to 13 using iterated scripts over Kubernetes with databases piping to each part of the process. But personally, for me, I'm a simple guy, right? I just, here we go, all right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I don't want to hold you back from lunch any longer. Hopefully... All right, tell them it'll be 10 more minutes and then we'll just sneak down and get all the good sandwiches, eh? All right, thank you, everybody.